Hello, and thank you for joining me for another episode of the Finish More Music podcast. So today I am joined by a multi-instrumentalist and producer who writes ambient and neoclassical electronica. His music has over 4 million streams on Spotify. He signed a 3-album deal with the excellent Nettwerk Records and a who's who of radio stations, including my very own beloved BBC, support his work. Mr. John Hayes, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for that nice intro. Very happy to be here.
Yeah, well, like super excited to have you here, and a big thank you to you as well for agreeing to do this show because it's a special one. We've got a live audience for this one, our members from the Finish More Music community are live on the session with us, and they're going to be asking you some questions a little bit later as well. So thank you for being up for that. I was over the moon when you agreed to trial this out with us.
Yeah, perfect. Oh, I love it. It's like it's almost like a talk show.
Yeah, I can't promise they'll behave
in
themselves, but we'll see. So I'm like super interested because usually on the show we have like dance music producers, banging techno, house, drum and bass, all of those things. And so it's amazing to have someone who's a really quality ambient music producer and enthusiast such as yourself. So to kick things off, I'd love to know what got you into the act of writing music, and did you start out writing this style of music, or has kind of the journey taken you here over the years?
Yeah, I think it's definitely been definitely a winding path to kind of arrive at this scene. I grew up playing piano. It was something that I guess wasn't really even a choice by me. I was kind of forced into it by my parents as kind of my grandma and mom were both really good pianists in their own right. And they just kind of, it was after school, come home, practice for, an hour or however long it was. I started taking some pretty formal lessons growing up, and I got in trouble with my instructors a lot because I always had the knack for going off, and I wanted to try to like write my own little like jingles and stuff like that. And, I wouldn't practice any of the material that they actually got me or anything like that. And then I'd get to my lesson and I'd be like, look at this though. Like I couldn't do any of my lessons, but look at this. And actually one of the instructors was the same instructor that my mom had. And she was really strict. Like she was like a no nonsense type person. So yeah, I got in some deep water with her every once in a while. But yeah, then kind of lead into this music, growing up, I was always, hip hop, electronic music, stuff like that. And I didn't even really know there was like a market for, I didn't know what ambient music was. I didn't know what neoclassical music was. I'd never really heard of any of that. I was starting to kind of write some of my own little just piano stuff just for my own muse kind of. And then one day I was at work and I stumbled across Nils Fromm's music on Spotify. I was just listening to a playlist while I was plugging away at work, and some light bulb went off in my head. I was like, people listen to this kind of music? Like this is exactly like the type of stuff that just really gets me going. And I guess it just really snowballed from there. Just, kind of one thing led to the next, piano stuff, to then learning more of, synthesizers and stuff. So yeah, it's definitely been a winding, there's been a lot of events that have led to that path for sure.
What was the bridge there? Because I can, totally get it. Imagine you're playing piano, you're being experimental with it. Then you hear the Nils Fromm. Did you then start researching, what's he using? What are other artists using? What was the bridge that got you to actually start exploring synthesizers?
Yeah, well, I think I heard his music and I just started immediately. Like I'm somebody, when I hear something that I really like, I just all of a sudden I got to figure out how they did that. And I just started nerding out, reading as many interviews by him as possible, watching interviews, looking at YouTube videos of him going through his studio and seeing all this stuff that he had. And I had already, I guess, so I guess backtracking a bit, when I was going into college, I was starting to go in for music engineering, but I also had a scholarship to play baseball in college as well. And the two kind of didn't, they're both things that require a massive commitment. And at the time, baseball was paying for my school. So I decided to shelf that, but I was, I was doing some little, my own little production stuff I had a little sampler, and, I was playing around in GarageBand, which evolved to Logic. So I had, there was some time where I kind of got my foot in the door with working in DAWs and learning all that stuff. But then I guess it really progressed after hearing Nils Fromm stuff. I really just started to dive back into that, full bore. It took something pretty, I guess, traumatic in my life to happen to really kind of decide that I wanted to pursue releasing this kind of music too. I had one of my best friends passed away from a kidney cancer that I think his doctor said only like 20 something people in the world have ever had that type of cancer. And it was really just this like eye-opening moment for me where, I had heard of Nils Fromm stuff. I was starting to kind of dive into that, but I wasn't really planning on releasing anything at that point. I was just doing something that I like to do. And then that happened, and I went just full regalian for it. I was like, I only got one shot at this. I don't get any do-overs in life, so I might as well just go for what I want to do. And that just, I think it was that commitment to saying, I'm going to go full in on this, which is what I guess sort of started to bridge that gap where it was, I'm going to learn. I got my first synthesizer is a Korg MS-20, which I still have sitting right over here. I use that all the time, but just started learning that. And then eventually started releasing some music, which was solo piano music, but I was still just learning synthesis and all that stuff. And finally saved up enough to get a Juno. And and that's kind of been that was kind of the like light bulb moment that went off for me, where it just was going full bore for it.
Yeah, it's always inspiring to hear when an event that's, obviously clearly tragic has planted a seed of something so magical at the same time, and how you've used the memory of someone and that situation in order to, do what you were put on the planet to do, which is live a life that is built and revolves all around music, which I know how incredibly passionate you are for all types of music, even outside of the music that you write. On that front, because I'm always interested about other influences. We've talked about the influences that are, I guess, directly related to the sound that we might classify that you release your music under. Do you listen to other types of electronic music and other music? And if you do, how does that influence what you do in the studio?
Oh yeah, all the time. I mean, that would, even going back to when before I knew about Nils Fromm or anything, like, in college, my buddy who actually passed away, we were massive like Deadmau5 fans. Like we were listening to, all sorts, Lane 8, it was a big one as well. I mean, I electronic music, I would say, was my first kind of like, I loved electronic music, but I didn't really know enough about production, I didn't know that style, and I didn't know how to make it, I guess. So I kind of leaned more into what I knew with, the keyboard and, and piano stuff. But, outside of that too, another big, I listened to a lot of Bon Iver, Justin Vernon, that's a big one. Novo More, kind of more of that acoustic, kind of like experimental acoustic type stuff. That I listen to that stuff all the time, and just pulling, I guess, the mood that a lot of that music conveys. I think that's something that I bring into the studio with me. I've listened, it's kind of funny, I listen to so much types of music. Like if you looked at my Spotify playlist page, it's just it's everywhere. you but yeah, I know electronic music definitely had a just such a huge impact on me, growing up and definitely in college, that I think that subconsciously it just, I can't even really, I don't even know if I could put a finger on what it is, but it's kind of like that subconscious that you just pull from. So yeah. And I guess another thing too, so when I was playing piano stuff, electronic music was like what I loved. So I started doing like these Instagram piano covers of electronic music that I really liked. So I'd be doing like covers of like an Millennium song or something, and I would just record them on my Instagram and post them up there. And so that was another thing that was, I would just learn the chords of all of it, and then I would just kind of improvise over the chords or cover over them and stuff. So yeah, I think there's a lot of.
So that's interesting. That's a bridge from your artistry in the studio or the piano practice to the outside world. Before we move on, tell us about the airport lounge.
Yeah,
because it just fits in here so beautifully.
Yeah, so it was, believe it would have been 2019. I played a gig for one of my friends who was doing an album release show in Minneapolis, and I was opening for him. And this lady was in the crowd during that show, and she was the arts director for the Minneapolis St. Paul Airport, which I guess it's won like a lot of awards for being like one of the nicer airports in the US. And she reached out to me after that show and asked if I wanted to be the resident pianist at the Minneapolis airport. And to that point, I had never been paid for my music really. I had never like landed a gig where I was like, this is a job for me to like play music. And so I started doing that. It was awesome. I would play in like 3-hour intervals at the airport. And yeah, I would just pretty much go there and I would test out material. I never covered other people's songs. I always just played my stuff, and I would just sit there and improvise for, like 3 hours basically, and just kind of play around with whatever. And I would try to take note too of if people were stopping and listening to different songs and be like, okay, so maybe this one is something. I would stash that away. And a lot of times I'd be recording on my phone too, just so I could kind of like go back and listen to some of that stuff. So but that was awesome. Being able to connect with people through music like that too was really, really cool. I'd have people sitting there in layovers, and I'd take like a 15-minute break and they'd come up and talk to me and chat with me. I met people from the UK. I met people traveling from, I guess like all over the place. And it was a really cool experience. COVID unfortunately put a pretty hard damper on that, but eventually got to go back to doing it.
And that's a super unconventional way. I don't know if I've ever heard of that as a way of people being able to test out their music and network, so to speak. It's really interesting. So it's opened up 2 threads for me. I'd like to explore both of them. You mentioned playing for 3 hours and playing your own material, and that's a lot. And I totally get it. If you're improvising, that's taking up a big chunk of the time. So I guess there's still a piece in the story that feels like I haven't quite uncovered it yet, which goes from I did some piano lessons and I was kind of messing about doing my own thing to I was good enough to improvise music for hours on end. What happened?
Yeah. A lot of practice. So I was taking like these really formal lessons all the way up pretty much until college. And then, college started, I didn't have a piano. And so I kind of stopped. I came back one summer to my parents' house, and I just started playing around the piano, and I kind of took that summer to just kind of get my chops back. And I'd be practicing every day, getting my scales down, just kind of getting back used to that playing. And then, after that, I was every day I'd get home from work and I would be playing for a couple hours, learning a new song. learning somebody else's song to practice. It was just definitely a lot of practice. I think that's something that it's not something that I just would be able to go and improvise for 3 hours. There was a lot of work that went into being able to do that. I realized I needed to brush up on my theory a little bit. So I would go and watch, I'd watch like a YouTube video on like jazz harmony and stuff like that. Or I would get I don't know if you've ever heard of something called a reel book. It's something they use in jazz a lot, where it's basically just the jazz standard, but with the chords blocked off. So I would just learn songs off there, learn different chord shapes, things like that. And yeah, I mean, that was a lot of the practice. I then once I finally decided I wanted to start releasing my music, I had probably a batch of about, I don't know, 15 songs or so that I didn't know how to release music. I had never, I hadn't even made my own website or anything like that. I didn't have press photos. I didn't have any of this stuff. And I sent it to one of my, I had just kind of, through networking with people on Facebook and Instagram, I had met a friend who, he now lives in Spain, but he was living in I believe it's Argentina. He was living in South America at the time. And I just sent him the demo of these tracks, and his label, they didn't end up releasing it, but they tweeted from their label account that it was one of the like best albums that they had heard. And then he referred me to a different label called Sonder House Music. It's a kind of a small label in upstate New York, who I ended up sending the album to, and they ended up releasing the first album, which to my surprise, like, people listened to it. It was one of those really pleasant surprise. I had no expectations, and I wasn't going into it. I was like, all right, I want to get this out there. And it was received really well. And that's kind of how I got introduced then to my friend that I ended up opening up for, that got me that piano gig. He's an artist in Minneapolis as well. His name's Jake Pavick. He writes a lot of really amazing neoclassical type stuff. But I didn't even realize another thing too. He was following me on Instagram because of my piano covers. So it was one of those things. I heard his music, I followed him back, and we just started connecting through there. And it was just kind of one of those things. It was like one thing led to the next. Yeah.
I love this story, because there's a real thread here that's emerging to me around the idea that you put in the hours, the practice, you put yourself out into the world, and then organically from there, like the airport lounge thing came along because somebody saw you and your skills. Basically, the way that I like to think of this is these lucky breaks, people call them, but I don't like thinking of them as lucky breaks. Something comes along and you've got to put the work in to be ready for it. And that's what you've done. And then these moments have come along and it feels effortless and organic.
Yeah.
But there's time and energy and effort and a dedication to your craft that sat underneath that to make it feel natural and effortless and organic, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, no, 100%. I think it's like the overnight success. It's like, I don't believe that that's a real thing. It's so much hours of practice and everything like that. And it's funny, people say, listening to my piano stuff, they're like, oh, well, I wish I could play the piano like that or something, like, but in reality, it's because I've been practicing every day. And I took the time to sit down and, really brush up on and get, as solid as I could be on that stuff, and especially, even with the production stuff as well, long before I even released anything that would be electronic, it was studying that, learning how to do it. There's a lot of work that goes in behind the scenes that, people don't see, that it just kind of, and then when it finally shows itself, it's like everybody's like, oh, whoa, where did it come from? It's like, well,
he just started last weekend.
yeah. Oh.
Amazing stuff. So obviously you had the release on Sonder House. What were the stepping stones from there to get on a label like Nettwerk, which is, it's a pretty big deal label to be finding yourself on?
Yeah. It so Sonder House is run by he's now, I guess he's my friend, and I would call him my unofficial manager. His name's Kyle McAvoy, and he's kind of been, one of my real just like mentors through releasing music. He's worked in the music business for a while. Went from that Sonder House release, he put me in touch with this label in the UK called Double J Music. I ended up releasing a follow-up EP, which was basically all just the throwaway songs from By the Woods. It's called Odds and Ends. It was this EP that came out after that. Got some traction with that. And then, I had kind of, at that point, I had built like some monthly listeners on Spotify. I had built up, I had made my website. I had, gotten press photos. I had started to really, like, I guess, slowly establish myself as somebody. So when my next album, well, it would have been a collaborative album through this, it was with me and this electronic producer, Maxie Dutcher, one of my really good friends. He lives in Montana. We pitched an album to this label called Moderna Records. And, it was one of those things where it was like each release built on the next one. So when I started pitching records to new record labels, I had kind of a little back catalog to fall back on, like, hey, I've released with Sonder House, now I've released with Moderna Records, at least with Double J, and it kind of like builds that validity. So you're not coming at some of these record labels completely blind. I got a release on this label called Western Vinyl, which in the kind of neoclassical ambient scene, they have some pretty established acts on there. And then once I got that release, I had this album that will be released that Nettwerk signed. Didn't know what to do with it. I talked to my friend Kyle. I was like, hey, I'm trying to figure out what to do with this. And he ended up getting he sent it to Nettwerk. I didn't even know of them at the time, as I feel dumb saying that now, but at the time I had no idea really who they were. He's like, I'm working with this great label, Nettwerk. I'm going to send this album over to them. Got back to me a couple of weeks later, said they loved it. And then I had a meeting with them, and that's kind of how that relationship popped up. It's kind of funny because, I guess I hadn't sought them out, but it's funny how that all just works up, years of connections to get to that point where I finally was able to get connected with them.
So what sort of things do you discuss as far as you're willing to share in a meeting like that? Because, them signing a 3-album deal with you is no small thing to put that level of commitment to an artist. What sort of things get discussed?
Yeah, so at that point, so I think I had released like 4 albums and an EP at that point. And I was really looking to sign my music to a label that loved my music, like not just like a distributor or something. Like I wanted to sign, at this point with a label that was going to invest in me and wanted, I was looking for kind of like a home label. Like I wanted to have kind of that home. And that was some stuff like going into the meeting, not knowing a lot about them either. I did my research. I wrote down some questions for their label head, Terry McBride, awesome guy. I believe he used to be Coldplay's manager, actually. So he knew like John Hopkins and stuff, and we just kind of like chatted about, they were asking what my vision for what I wanted my future stuff to be. And I think that was really important for me. Like they made me feel like I would be invested in and feel at home at there. And that was something that was like so important for me. I wanted to have communication. I had worked with some places where it would take a couple of weeks for them to email me back, even after I had been signed with them. So, it was just kind of that feeling at home, and that they genuinely liked my music and weren't just signing it to, because, record labels, they're running a business. They need to make, their money too, but having an artist that they're invested in and want to develop too. I thought that was a big part of that meeting that I had with them, is them asking, what's my vision for my artist, my artist path look like. And that it just made me feel really comfortable with them. And that kind of led to how I ended up signing with them.
Yeah, I love how you were clear going into the meeting what you were looking for, as much as, being prepared to give them the answers to what they were looking for. There was a synergy that you'd already thought about in advance that had to be in place in order for you to want to move forward with them, which I think is really important. And having your vision mapped out, it's well, you don't design your life, somebody else does, right?
Yeah, and I think that's another important thing too to remember. And my friend Kyle, he had been, he had always been preaching, remember that, like, the label should work for you too. You shouldn't just be like, they should be doing stuff for you that you can't do on your own. So that was something for me that was important. I had I had been like organically growing my followings and stuff like that. And, I went to MailChimp. I learned how to make a one sheet to send to press places. I set up like a newsletter and all this stuff. And I felt like I had kind of like gotten to like, how much can I do on my own? I wanted to, sign with a place that was going to work, for me as well, and be able to like have reach that I didn't have, and be able to do stuff that I wasn't able to do anymore. So
yeah, I mean, you've kind of alluded to this a little bit by talking about some of the experiences with other labels as well as this kind of reach. What has, or rather maybe a better way to phrase this is, how has your experience changed in terms of working with labels and what they do and how they, I guess, behave, present themselves, interact, communicate with you as you've climbed the ladder to bigger and bigger and more established labels?
Yeah, so in the beginning, like, with Sonder House, and obviously nothing against them at all, but like, they're a smaller label. A lot of like your PR stuff, that's all on you. They don't really have the budget to be like reaching out to, a lot of stuff. They're kind of more focused on getting it out there. They'll help with, some playlisting stuff. And as I kind of moved up, there'd be a little bit more, they'd have a little bit more reach. But I kind of started finding, because I was doing this stuff on my own as well, even when I was starting to sign with like Moderna and, Western Vinyl and stuff, I was still getting in there, sending stuff out to press and all that stuff. The biggest difference now, once I signed with Nettwerk, I got a team assigned to me. So I got like a manager assigned to me, a social media person, someone that does like PR stuff. And it's like I have like this little family within the label, where it's like, I'll have meetings with my manager, kind of like, hey, well, like, you've told me you were working on some stuff like that. Like, I'll send them demos. They'll give me a little feedback now. So it's been kind of one of those, having that just like team assigned to you has been, it's really, for me, it's something that's invaluable. It's like I have this little group of people that just all have my back and are like super into all my stuff, which is, it's awesome. It
must feel pretty good as well to have a team assigned to you, right?
Yeah, I know. It's really cool. And not something that, it's funny, like when I was writing just little piano music, I was like, never in my wild, like I would have never thought that there would be like, I'd have like a person, like a PR person, or like a manager or something like that working with my stuff. So Yeah, it's been great. And just like I think another thing too is just like great communication. Like if I ask them a question that day, they're like getting back to me, and giving me good input and stuff. So
Awesome.
yeah, I would say that's kind of been the evolution there.
I want to dive in a little bit as well into really your process for writing albums. And it's of particular interest to me on the show because, as I mentioned at the top of the show, we have a lot of kind of banging dance music producers. And whilst they do write albums sometimes, it often tends to be EPs that they're creating, whereas you put out a whole bunch of albums now. And there's a different process that goes into that. There's a curation of that music and a story that goes behind it and so on and so forth. So I guess I'm going to keep it like a really sort of 10,000 foot view. What is the process for you? You go, right, I'm going to start my new album. Now what? Other than procrastinate for a little bit. Now what?
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's funny, like each album has kind of they shape themselves differently, and it's almost kind of like it's a little spotlight on that time in your life. That's kind of like how I've looked at each album. My first album was a lot of like reflection from my friend passing away, so it was a lot of writing just just songs on the piano that when I was in that headspace. And another thing that goes into is when you're writing an album, it's lots of songs get written that don't make it onto the final.
How many? If you were to put a rough ballpark figure on ratio of written to make it,
like 20, over 20 usually songs that get written, and then maybe 10 to 14 or so will make the final cut.
And how many get started? Is it a case of you've got 20 that are a pool of which you're going to select from? There are a lot of other noodlings and practicing and I don't know, maybe finished but not finessed pieces of music.
Yeah, well, so for a lot of the piano stuff, basically what I do is I'll just turn the mics on and I'll just start improvising. I'll start playing around with some chords, things like that, and I'll record for like an hour of just doing that. Then I'll go back and I'll start to listen through. If I start to like hear a little idea of something, I'll be like, oh, maybe I should pursue that. And it kind of just gets broken. Like when I'm starting like a piano album, that's kind of usually how I start, is I'll take like 2 or 3 sessions like that where I just am improvising on, and then I'll start to take little ideas from those improvs and then start to, maybe develop those into more tracks. And, I'll get rough ones, but then, by the time final takes are ready, it's, I've practiced the ones that I'm doing the final takes for quite a few times. So I guess I wouldn't call the piano ones finished, but they're more like rough sketches. But then, going into more like the electronic, like I did, my album with Moderna, can't remember, I think it was like 11 tracks. But yeah, I would say there's probably like 15, 16 tracks in there. And I don't think all of them are finished either, but it's definitely, it's a process, and it takes some time too. I think it's kind of, it takes a lot.
What about the tracks that really light you up, but you decide don't fit the concept or the flow of the album? What do you do with those?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like the tracks that really light me up usually end up making it on the album. I'll find a way to make them work, because I think that's usually my barometer of if it's, if it makes me feel if I feel some sort of way when I'm listening back to that track, I feel like I have a fairly good internal compass of what I think, what resonates with me. And that's kind of usually my barometer if it's going to make it onto the album. And then from there, we'll figure out how to make it work, whether it's the track arrangement on the album, how it flows into something. yeah, I would say. And then, you know, some of the ones that don't make it are ones that maybe I thought were really good, or they might have been like sounding really well produced or something. And then I listened back and it didn't resonate with me the same way that it originally had. And that's usually something that will get put aside and, you know, maybe revisited later. Yeah.
Cool. So one of the things I love about your website that's directly linked to the creation of the album, and one of the things I miss a lot with not going out and buying CDs and having, you know, a cover with artwork and a book and a treasure and often a story behind the music. On your website, underneath the albums, there's a description, like what I would call almost a concept of what the album is. So I'll read one out so everyone can get an idea of this. By the Woods' first album, I hope it gives you the feeling that you are sitting on the piano bench next to me as I play these songs to you. These little tunes all remind me of a certain person or place in my life, but they could each mean something completely different for each of you. That is the beauty of music. The title comes from a poem by Robert Frost that I particularly like. So there's a little window that you've opened up there, which I absolutely love. This a connection to us, and a way that we can think and explore the music outside of just listening to it, which is also valuable.
Right.
Is this something that, I mean, this one feels like, but I guess this is a question for all of them, that you're intentional about before you start the album? That's to say, I've got a concept and I'm steering the music in this direction. I mean, this one is, each of these songs remind me of a place. Yeah. So it feels like there was an intentionality before it started.
Yeah. And I think with that album, there definitely was. I think it's varied from album to album. I would say The Last Best Place, that's another one. It's a solo piano one. That one had an intention going into it. I guess there wasn't an intention to write like an album, but the concept of The Last Best Place, I unfortunately lost another friend pretty suddenly, and that was another album that I went into with no plan. You know, there wasn't a plan, but then as it kind of, I think as the album develops, I think that's where if you take a step back and look at, you know, what's going on in your life, what's happening there, maybe that's when you start to see that concept start to kind of flesh itself out a bit more. I would say, like, for example, I use that poem by Robert Frost, the By the Woods, because a lot of it has to do with this feeling of like cognitive dissonance. So you like have like two different thought paths at one time. Like at that time I was still working. I didn't really know if like writing my music was the right thing to do. And I was kind of having like these two thought paths of like, should I just like keep working, or should I like really dive into what I want to do? So yeah, it's kind of funny. They sort of, the more I think about it, they sort of flesh themselves out through that period of time while you're writing. And then I can go back and I try
itself to you.
Yeah, it kind of reveals itself to me at the end. Like my upcoming album, Beautifully Lost Mind, that was an album that really it didn't really take shape until I was almost done with it, and I looked back at everything that had happened, and I kind of like was trying to analyze what was going on in my life at that time. And that's kind of where I started to like, all right, this is what the concept of this album is. And I listened to the music and I'm like, all right, yeah, this fits exactly what I was feeling at that time.
Right. And then once you've got that and it's revealed itself, does that then start to inform the direction of the remainder of the album to get it finished?
Yeah, I think so. It's usually, you know, it's probably about halfway, 3/4 of the way through, and then that's kind of where it starts to like really shine. And then that's where it's like that foot on the gas to get the rest done, because it's like, you know, I've zeroed in on what this album's going to be about.
It makes sense, it being, you know, a bigger body of work than, you know, working on a single or an EP. And it really reminds me, I've read a lot of authors who talk about this as well. They kind of have a concept in their mind, but even as they're writing, the characters they're creating surprise them with the things that they do. Things get uncovered because they're just writing, it's a stream of consciousness, and then something happens that is almost taking them through their own story as they're creating it. So exciting. I love it. Now, one song in particular, Sleep Song, has proven to be like mega popular. 2 million streams for that tune alone. What's the story behind that? Is there one, or it just happened to be, you know, that it just took off?
So that I am constantly surprised that is one of my most popular songs. That actually was a song that was supposed to be on my initial album, By the Woods. Didn't make it. All I was doing when I was writing that song, it was probably about like 1-2 a.m. and I was testing out microphone positioning on my piano and figuring out this new recording chain that I had kind of dove into, and I was just testing out to see if it sounded good to me. And I just recorded I was trying to like, I had a roommate, one of my old college roommates at the time was living with me, and like it's 1 or 2 a.m. on like a Wednesday. I was like, nah, I can't wake him up. So I was trying to play really like it's super quiet. I had the preamps on my mic like just cranked, and I just kind of like improvised this little like 2 or 3 chord progression with a little melody over the top. And it did make it on By the Woods, and then I released it as on my next EP, and like somehow still, like I said, it still surprises me that that's one of my bigger tracks.
So it's just like, it's just something that people have gravitated towards. It isn't something that you doubled down on pushing it harder or anything like that.
Oh yeah, I listened to it. I think the next day after I recorded it, I listened to it, and I was like, okay, yeah, the mics sound great, recording sounds okay. Didn't listen to it. I like put it in there. Maybe I listened to it one more time when I was putting together the final track list for By the Woods. But then, I didn't really, I was like, well, it's just like a test recording. Like, nobody's going to listen to this little like short little improv thing. And then.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I find this myself, but creativity is just so interesting in that what we judge that other people might or might not like is often really off target. Things we can be really excited, I've absolutely nailed this thing, and it doesn't land. And then something that you're like, well, kind of take it or leave it, blows up like this. And it reminds me of one of my favorite quotes, actually, that was from this podcast, Nick Muir, who said, I'm paraphrasing this probably, but you have no right to other people's opinions on your music, which was just, you put it out there, and what will be. And that's it. You can't control it or anything like that. I find it really interesting. Okay, so I have got one kind of big question that I can't wait to ask you, but I'm gonna like put some tension in the podcast now and ask that later, because we've got some questions from the FMM members that have been coming in. And so I want to fire them at you. Are you ready, first and foremost?
Let's go. Let's
you need to take a shot.
Let's take some coffee here.
All right, here we go. So Mark Allen, who I know is a really big fan of your music, he said, I'd love to know how John thinks about form. Your songs are often short and perfect. Do you have an arrangement in mind when you start, or does it evolve organically?
Yeah, that's a good question. It usually evolves organically. Sometimes I don't know if there's like a jazz thing where it's like, well, I guess this could be like most song arrangements, like A, B, A, or like, A, B, C, A, B, like kind of that form. So it's like, I'll have like an A section, then I'll like do a B section. So I'll get like, I'll get a melody going that fits the A section. Like, that's like kind of my main melody. Then I'll get a little B section, because I'll be like, all right, we need to deviate from this at some point a little bit, so we can bring it back to that. But yeah, with piano stuff, it's mostly improvising. With, the more composed out stuff, I guess there's never really like a a set plan. It usually just kind of, it reveals itself as I'm writing the track, which, you know, sometimes it surprises me. It's like, this will fit better here, you know, I thought this should be the opening part, but maybe, you know, we'll
Right.
move
So
it.
you're creating the building blocks and then seeing where they best fit with one another, and if something else
Yeah,
needs to be made to make it flow, or something isn't quite working in there.
right. Yep.
Perfect. Love it. Okay. Louis Hayward says, you've talked a lot about your piano background. Does everything start with a piano line or similar when writing a new track? So I know you mentioned that you will spend an hour potentially at the piano and start extracting bits. Is that the same for the more synth laden music as well?
Yeah. I would say a good portion of my stuff starts at the piano. Or, you know, if it's late now, at least I have like a little MIDI controller where I'll start just playing chords out. But it's funny, you know, a lot of it always goes back to the piano. Even if I'll start something on like my Juno, or even like, you know, I'll start playing some chords in like, you know, Diva or Synth or something. For me, it's always makes way more sense if I can't figure out like, oh, where should this chord go to? I'll just go and sit down at the piano and I'll start hashing out how that progression should go. Then I'll go back to my synth, and then whatever I'm working on in Ableton, and get that. But yeah, a lot of it really starts at the piano. I do a lot of that, especially when I'm starting to write an album, even if I know it's not going to be piano. It starts at the piano, just improvising. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, no, I love it that there's like a simplicity, isn't there, in your connection to the piano. It's an extension of you. So if you are hitting a wall over here somewhere, it makes sense to go back
right
to
back
that
to the
thing
piano,
where you most creatively flow in order to fix that thing or to bypass it. Brilliant.
Yeah, it's funny how it's like it won't make sense to me if I'm playing pads on a Juno, and then I'll just go to the piano and be like, okay, yes, all right, that makes sense, and then I'll go back and we're good.
That's fascinating. I love it. It's so cool. So Stu Robertson, again, around the form of the tracks, but he's just wondering, because they're short by in comparison to, I'd say, the average of ambient tracks. So yours are often sort of 2 to 4 minutes, and ambient can wander off for ages. He's wondering, is this a conscious choice, or do you experiment with longer form pieces of ambient music?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I don't know if it's like a conscious choice. It just, to me, it's what makes sense at the time for the track. Even with some of the more, ambient pieces, I mean, to give you an example, for one, on my album Du Nord, I did that with a producer named Elskavan. His name's Chris Bartels. He lives in Minneapolis as well. We sat down and we improvised for like 2 hours just on the synths, and like, you would have looked at that and been like, this is just massive form. We're like, all right, well, we got to shrink this down to something that makes sense, that's consumable. So I guess it's just, it's a hard one to answer, because I don't like have there's never really like a giant plan going into a lot of that stuff. It's, I'll take like a 10-minute improvisation and I'll condense it down. I'll be like, what are the chords I played there, and how can we make this make sense?
Yeah, so good. Almost like a collage or a tapestry of music that you're then pulling from.
Yeah.
Wicked stuff. So Mr. Mark Allen again, your recent tracks have amazing warmth in the synths, hardware, or in the box. So you've got your hardware synths. Do you use software synths as well?
Yeah, I use quite a mix. I mean, I got Diva a couple, I don't know, maybe like 9 months ago or so. I haven't released anything using that, but it's awesome. But for the most part, on my newer tracks, yeah, Juno, MS-20, and then I run a lot of those through. I have some just like these Clark Technic EQ, so they're like cheap Pultec clones that I run stuff through a lot, most of my synths through. But yeah, it's a mix. It's kind of funny how I've really started. I used to be like such a like hardware outside the box type person, and the more that I've produced and the more that I've like made music, it's like there's so much good stuff that's in the box as well that you don't have to like. I think it's kind of like, you know, you could have the analog versus digital debate all day, but I like weaving them together. I think there's like a, you know, and at this point some of the digital stuff is so good, it's like you'd never be able to tell.
Yeah, it's like why force yourself into a choice when you can have the best of both worlds? Yeah, absolutely. Right, I'm going to grab two more questions. So I've got one from Ant Essex, which is really related to Mark's question, which is, out of all of your synths, your VSTs, and your hardware, what's the favorite?
Are we including my piano as well?
No, not including your piano.
Yeah.
You can't have
that. It's my Juno for sure.
Right.
I mean, my Juno 60 is like my pride and joy. I love that thing. It took me so long to save for that. Like I saved, so I like my streaming royalties, like I saved those for like a year so I could get my Juno 60. I just knew I wanted one. And the nice thing too is what I love about it is it's so simple. You can't really confuse yourself that much with it. And I think that like that simplicity helps me use it in really creative ways too, because I'm not like diving down like a ton of different rabbit holes with it. At this point, I've kind of got it patched out where I know exactly what I'm going to do. But, you know, if I'm creating a new sound, it's just the ease of using it is just, I love it. It's, you know, I don't find myself, and, you know, I've gotten like lots of other synths. I've had like a Rev, I've had a Prophet, I had a Polybrute, sold them because there's so much going on in them. I like simplicity. I like getting in there and like getting into like that flow state and not having to like worry about having decision paralysis with my synths and stuff.
Back to it being an extension of you. Okay, so one last question, which is a really good one, I think, from Arena. Do you like to listen to your own music for leisurely listening?
No, I don't. I really don't. I get like, it's so funny. My girlfriend and like my friends every once in a while, they'll like pop my music on if we're like out or something. And I'm like, turn it off, please. Like, I guess I don't, you know, and I guess it depends on the context too. Like, you know, we'll have people, my girlfriend and I will have, you know, people over and, you know, everybody's like chatting and stuff and they'll turn it on. And I guess I just get like super self-conscious about it because I'm like, I mean, I shouldn't say like I'm a perfectionist, but I listen back to it and I'm like, oh man, I could have EQ'd that a little different.
I never
and
finished.
I don't like to go back and listen and like focus on it because it's like, well, there's nothing I can do about it now. So I like to, you know, just try to look forward. And, you know, I try to build on, you know, everything. I want to one up myself every time. So every piano record that I do, I want the next one to sound better than the last one that I did. But yeah, I don't know. I shouldn't say, you know, I hate listening. I like my own music. I like that I make it, but
there's always you're always listening. Oh, there's an improvement.
Yeah, I listen to it so much more critically than I think other people do. Like I'm listening to it in a super critical manner, whereas opposed to, you know, I'm sure my friends and stuff are listening to it enjoyingly. But cool. Yeah, it's hard for me to turn it off.
Big thank you to our community for asking the questions. There were some crackers in there, right? They did a good job, John.
Yeah.
Okay, so I have one final question for you, which is, what are your thoughts and feelings on becoming the newest member of Team FMM and getting to spend time with our community as our new connections architect, aka community manager?
Yeah, the big reveal, right? Yeah. Oh man, I'm so excited. Been now with FMM here for probably about a month, and just kind of being able to, I've been creeping in the community a little bit, you guys. So I've been able to see your names come up
He's
and
been a
stuff.
watching.
And it's been amazing, like we were talking about earlier in the podcast, just kind of my growth of figuring out exactly what I want to do. I love music. I love working with people that love music. I love talking music. I love all of that. And, being able to work with a community like this, that's as talented, supportive as everybody. I'm just chomping at the bit. I can't wait to get in there with you guys. And, it's been, it's been a great, and I'm so excited.
Yeah, well, so are we, obviously. You're absolutely amazing, and we can't wait to get you stuck in with all the guys and girls as well, which is brilliant. So yeah, the big reveal that we thought we'd put into the podcast, and thank you for jumping on and doing the show as an artist first and foremost, and for being welcome to this experiment and putting yourself out there, as you've done so much with your music. Before I let you go, it's a pretty big darn week for you, because you might have an album coming out this week, mightn't you? Tell us all about it. So excited.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So my newest album coming out this Friday, Beautifully Lost Mind, is the title for it. Started writing it. It actually all started with one of my friends coming over, and we just were playing around on my sub 37. We made a little progression. And then COVID hit like a week later, and or not, like, I don't know, a little bit after that. But yeah, super excited. It's been like a really long track of that. It's kind of funny, I even submitted this album to a different label that rejected it, and then that's how I ended up stumbling into Nettwerk. So it's kind of funny how it all just ties together. It's a lot of ambient stuff. There's some kind of electronica feels to it, and a big part of it was written during isolation, when it was like peak lockdowns. That's when a lot of it started writing it. And like the Beautifully Lost Mind was kind of like that. I kind of had this like sudden awareness, like this sudden presence of, I think everybody was going a little crazy at that time, but I started to kind of, that's when I started getting like really into mindfulness, and I think kind of like leaning into that in a positive way, that I could channel it into my music, is a lot of what this album was about. And yeah, it's been a long kind of process, but I'm super excited for it to be out. Most of the singles are out. It's kind of just collaborating into an album now at this point. So yeah.
So that drops on Friday. Where can everyone listen to it and grab themselves a copy?
Yeah, so it's any Spotify, Apple Music, Bandcamp. It's been up for pre-sale. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get a physical. I usually love making vinyls, but all there were backlogs for vinyls for like a year and a half almost. But yeah, Spotify, Apple. I release music just as my name, John Hayes. You can search it, not to be confused with, there is some a rock musician named John Hayes.
Right. Okay.
I think you'll be able to tell the difference in the music pretty quick, I think.
Yeah. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Well, look, that is the album. Super excited, and obviously grateful to be welcoming you to the team publicly now. You've been our little secret for a while now, which is amazing, and a huge thank you for doing the show as well. It's been absolutely brilliant from start to finish, and I was really looking forward to this, as I said, because of the style of music you write, and the album approach and the route that you've taken is quite different to a lot of the guests that I have on the show. So it's been absolutely amazing having you on the show, John. Thank you so much, buddy.
Oh, thank you very much. Appreciate having me. And yeah, I'm really excited to seeing everybody out in the community. I'll be out in there, so we'll be able to interact on there.
Beautiful stuff. Thank you very much, John. Take care. Till next time.